Hello, everybody, and welcome to Heart of the Matter. I'm your host, Elizabeth Vargas, and it's great to have you here. Today on the podcast, we have a friend of mine. His name is Paul Holes. You may have heard of him. He became very famous after he was one of the detectives who managed to identify and catch the Golden State Killer, one of America's most prolific serial killers. He spent more than 2 decades hunting for him. Well, Paul has written a memoir, Unmasked, which just spent 3 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. It's an amazing book. And in it, he talks not only about his life as a cold case investigator, but on the toll that it took on him. He has had lifelong battles with anxiety, sometimes even depression. He admits he often turned to alcohol to self-medicate through that anxiety and depression. And in the book, he explores the toll that working on these murder cases takes on him. And his openness and vulnerability really pulls back the curtain on what it can be like in law enforcement and the toll that it can take on a person's mental health. Paul and I know each other because we worked together on America's Most Wanted, which aired last year on Fox. Paul is also on a podcast called The Murder Squad. He's got his own huge following on that. And really, I'm amazed at Paul's openness and bravery in being incredibly honest about mental health. So without further ado, please welcome Paul Holes to Heart of the Matter. Paul Holes, welcome to Heart of the Matter. It's so great to have you, and congratulations on cracking the New York Times bestseller list.
Well, thank you very much. It's so nice for you to have me, Elizabeth.
Unmasked is such a phenomenal book. It's an amazing read on many, many different levels. But I wanted to start by reading to you how you start the book in the prologue. December 2019. I order another bourbon neat. This is the drink that will flip the switch. I don't even know how I got here, to this place, to this point. Something is happening to me lately. I'm drinking too much. My sheets are soaking wet when I wake up from nightmares of decaying corpses. The dam is breaking. I'm cratering fast. So I end up in a place like this, a bar on Hollywood Boulevard called Jumbo's Clown Room. Yes, it's a real place, entirely red inside. Red walls, red floors, red bar, red lights. I order another drink and swig it, trying to forget about the latest case I can't shake. Yeah. So tell me about that night. Tell me why you were trying to forget.
Well, I didn't know what was going on to me psychologically. This is actually, after my entire career, I had retired. I had gotten, the media notoriety because I was involved in helping solve this Golden State Killer case.
That's putting it mildly.
And starting to work on the TV side, I was doing a series of unsolved cases, working directly with law enforcement and talking to family members. And for whatever reason, this one case out in Fort Worth, Texas, 17-year-old Carla Walker, really hit me hard. And I really bonded with her family, related to the brother. And just the emotional impact hit me, unusually so. Mm-hmm. And I think it was exacerbated by the alcohol. This is where I didn't choose to go to this Jumbo's place, but when I was looking at, they have pole dancers at this place, and you see everybody, and it's a typical club where you have both men and women in the audience, and they're throwing $1 bills up on stage. And then these women would get down on all fours to scoop up the $1 bills. And I was just going, I can't handle this. I can't watch this. And one of the girls was so young, and all I'm seeing is her lying in a ditch on the side of the road because she came across a predator, and that's when I ended up which I normally don't have. I had a $100 bill, and I just wrapped it in a one, and I went up to the stage, and she did her little sultry crawl over to me, thinking I was just this, perverted old man wanting to get her close. And she grabbed the money, and I told her, take care of yourself. And I literally saw the sultry face turn into the little girl that she was. And I could tell, this wasn't her choice to be here. The next morning, I wake up and I literally have tears streaming down my face going, what? And I was just like, what is going on? And that's when I ultimately decided, I need to seek some help.
What kind of help did you seek?
Well, I ended up going into a therapist out here. I live in Colorado Springs, and Colorado Springs is a huge military town. And my wife, through her resources at the PD, had got the name of this therapist who some of the officers had to go see. And she was very good because she, of course, was dealing with the soldiers and special forces guys, but had the experience to recognize trauma. And, so I started talking to her about, various aspects in my career, including some of the cases and some of the experience that I had that I wrote in the book. And there's times when I'm breaking down in front of her. And she basically told me, you've been stuffing this inside without getting help all along. And now, in essence, it's coming out.
How common is this for, detectives, cold case investigators in your line of work? Because, in your new book, Unmasked, you really talk about what that's like to arrive on a crime scene and process it, and how you're dealing with things that most of us never deal with. I mean, as a news reporter, I've seen a lot of things that, my kids have never seen, my friends have never, my family's never seen. But I think you take it even a step further. I mean, you really have to examine sometimes horrific scenes. And I'm always wondering, A, how you handle it, and B, how in general homicide detectives or cold case investigators handle it.
Well, I think, for those individuals that do this line of work that care, it impacts them. And I believe it's much more common than what is realized. In part, during most of, I would say towards the beginning of my career, it was very male dominated in terms of who is in investigations, and that has really diversified as the years went on. But when you look at individuals that are my age or older that have gone through this, being men, it wasn't something you could express freely with anybody that you're working with. And that's where I think it just gets buried. It wasn't talked about, and there wasn't that realization. But then I've seen, in part, I interviewed Sheriff Dave Reichert. He a Green River killer. He was somebody earlier in his career. He was a frontline investigator. He's helping recover the body. He's doing death notifications to the family. And as I'm talking to him, and it was over a Zoom, but he choked up, and I go, I know exactly what he's feeling. And then just recently, a good friend of mine who's in law enforcement on a podcast, Small Town Dicks, Dave Grice, he got an advance copy of my book, and he finished reading that prologue, which you read part of, and he texted me and saying, that hit hard. I so relate. And he was an investigator that specialized in child abuse cases. So I believe that, it is a common psychological impact that all people that work this line of work, especially when they care about the cases, they care about the victims. It's something that we're experiencing, and we cope in different ways. And obviously for me, the alcohol in part is a coping mechanism, and
well, that's very common. I mean, the rates of alcohol abuse disorder
is very high with police officers.
Yeah. And for different reasons. Like I'm not somebody who ever worked patrol. Yeah, right. So now I don't have the experience of dealing with the citizens on a day in and day out basis. And I haven't developed that cynicism that a lot of patrol guys develop or see some of the things that they see. But obviously working homicide cases, focusing in on, the serial predator, I see, the horrors on those one-on-one types of tragedies that these monsters are committing. And it is. I think there's, law enforcement, whether you're a sworn officer or you're a civilian working in the field, you are building up trauma over the course of your career. And maybe some people deal with it better than others. And I thought I was strong. I never really had. I knew, I was sensitive to the cases, but I never had an experience like I had experienced after I retired.
Funny, somehow it all comes crashing down. It's like your defense was finally lowered, and I don't know. You write in the book, and I know that you and I, when we worked together on America's Most Wanted, talked about this briefly, but you and I are both military brats. I'm an Army brat, you're an Air Force brat. And both of us, since a very young age, had panic attacks. Mm-hmm. How old were you when you first had your panic attacks?
Well, the first real panic attack, I was 13. And, I knew I had some, when I think back, it's this is the nerd in me. I got into I really liked from a young age the original Star Trek series.
And, me too. I loved it.
Okay. And I gravitated towards the Spock character because of the lack of emotion. It was like, oh, that'd be so nice not to have to experience all these butterflies that are inside of me, And so for a period of time, I would say from age, really from about age 10, that was when that whole stoicism type of personality of it was like, okay, I can protect myself by really trying to limit the emotions that I would experience. But then, puberty hits, and then I'm, the first panic attack I had is when two cute girls walk by me and say hi. And, I just had no idea what was happening. I thought I was going to die, because I just went into a panic mode. And then it just started spiraling out of control after that, throughout high school and early into my 20s. And then I was starting, and it morphed in terms of what would set off the panic attacks. Initially it was a relationship with the girls in high school. But then I internalized it to where it was my health. I've taken too much allergy meds, or my heart just did a funny beat. And the next thing I know, I'm just cratering. And a lot of time it'd be in the middle of the night. It's that nighttime anxiety. And then I would wake up and start, I check my pulse. Am I doing okay? And next thing I know, I'm in a full-blown panic attack. While, like with my first marriage, my wife could sleep through a hurricane. She had no idea. I'm literally sweating and pacing and, going down in basically a fetal position on the floor, thinking this is it. I'm done. So,
did you tell anybody that this was happening to you? I know that I was very ashamed of my anxiety and my own panic attacks. So I kept them hidden for, nobody helped me as a kid. And I internalized that must mean there's something's wrong with me. And I've got to keep it hidden. So I didn't tell anybody, and that made it actually worse.
In high school, my parents ended up taking me in to see a mental health professional on the base, and then she ended up treating me, it was like a self-instruction, hooking me up to this biofeedback machine and learning how to relax. And to this day, that skill of learning how to relax by going, now I can sense the tension, at least in my body, was something that was very positive. My first wife during our dating relationship, literally saw me go into a panic attack. So she was aware that I had those, but I never did talk to her about it. And I would hide the fact that I had the panic attack, the night before. And of course, nobody at work knew anything about it.
Yeah, that would be So, I mean, one of the things I remember a therapist asking me once was, given the fact that you're so prone to anxiety and panic attacks, why on earth would you pick a career in like live television?
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you the same question. Given that you were prone to anxiety and panic attacks, why would you pick a career as a homicide investigator? I mean, a crime scene specialist who, most people would describe every single day of your work as a trauma of a certain type.
But I think, when I was going into the career, I wasn't looking at the cases as being something that would influence me. To be frank, when I first started out as a forensic scientist and when I was civilian forensic scientist, I was a drug analyst and alcohol analyst, and I testified all the time. Within 3 years, I had testified 150 times.
In court, in trials.
Court. Yeah, and this is where that was my biggest concern with the anxiety is, first there is a public speaking component.
Right.
But it's also adversarial. It's not just everybody wanting to, listen to Paul talk. It's now attorneys that are grilling me and trying to discredit me. So it's a very intense type of speaking that you have to do, especially as an expert. And that was my biggest concern, is that I would have a panic attack on the stand and it would just literally ruin me. I didn't think anything about the possibility that once I got working violent crimes, that there would be an impact on me with my anxiety. But of course, as time went on, both working those cases and then the pressures of what my bosses expected of me, there was a couple times I ended up in the emergency room because of panic attacks. And
really?
I called my commander, and I'm not telling him I'm having a panic attack. I'm telling him I think I've got a heart attack, cardiac issue. Yeah. And so I still was hiding it. And that's where I literally was driving around, working a case, and then it was like, boom, panic attack hit, and I just drive myself straight to the emergency room, and then I have to come up with an excuse as to why I'm at the ER to my commander.
I don't know about you, but I felt very lonely hiding all of that. Did you feel the same way?
Yeah, I think the panic attacks is, for me, definitely, it's something that I don't think I would ever really open up to when I was younger. But I think the anxiety aspect and how it, impacted me, I kind of kept people at a distance. And I didn't open up even with my wife, in terms of, here's, what I am dealing with. And so, yes, there is a lonely aspect to it. Because I didn't have somebody that I felt I could share it with.
It's interesting. I always felt that as an Army brat growing up, nobody ever got to know me well enough to see my panic and anxiety because we moved every couple of years. And there's a part of your book where you're talking about you and your first wife going to see a marriage counselor. And both of you reveal that you are both military brats, and the marriage counselor says, "Oh, well, there's the problem right there. We have two people who are unable to bond."
Yes, yeah, and it's so true, and that's where, as I talked to that particular counselor. It's like, Paul, you never learned how to maintain a long relationship, which is so true because I just kept getting ripped away from anybody that I developed a friendship with.
Either you move every year or they all move every year.
Yes. That's just it. And but the positive, if you want to call it the positive, is I got very good at integrating in with new people and different people and very diverse sets of people. So that ultimately, I believe, helped me in my career. But to this day, I still have a tendency to keep people at arm's length, and am very poor at, trying to put the effort in to maintain a relationship or a friendship.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that your sensitivity, whether the sensitivity that you have that makes you prone to anxiety, helped you in your career? I mean, you had an incredible career as a cold case investigator and as a homicide investigator. You caught the Golden State Killer. And in this book, you really talk a lot about how when you get to a crime scene, you would stand back. And while everybody else is sort of in and out and, let's go follow this lead, you talk about how you would step back and put yourself first in the victim's position. Like, why, in this one case I'm thinking about from the book, why did she fight? There's signs of a struggle. So clearly this person didn't come into this small trailer and overpower her immediately. So she was able to fight. There's signs of a struggle. There's this on her body. There's that. She's lying this way. And then you would also do the same thing and put yourself in the killer's perspective. That takes a certain gift. And I'm curious as to whether or not you think that gift of empathetic personalization, putting yourself in the victim's place and then in the killer's place, is related somehow or is developed somehow because of that heightened sensitivity that you have being as anxious as you are.
Yeah, and I think you'll relate to this because when I go back to having to reintegrate into a new classroom or with or another group or whatever, and I don't know the kids, of course there's the anxiousness, but then there's also the to protect myself. I'm not just walking right into this group.
You're reading the room.
I'm reading the room. I'm seeing, I'm starting to evaluate. And as a young kid, it's not a conscious decision. It's more of you sit back and I end up being able to kind of see, okay, here's the kids that I'm most comfortable initially, being able to, go out and recess with or whatever. And so there is that almost a learned sensitive approach to getting into this environment as a form of self-protection. And I think that particular skill set translates into what I'm writing about when I'm taking a look at the scene, because even though I'm not, in fact, I've been told that I've got a very, what my wife calls my scene-tude. When I walk up on a homicide scene, I'm very confident. I know what I'm doing, but I take my time, and that's what I learned as a child. That's, I think, integrates into where now I'm reading the room. It's just that it's not a room full of kids. It's a room full of evidence. It's a room full of violence. The victim is there. And then it's, well, okay, now what is going to be the particular chain of events that I need to discern that led to this condition, and
why did she do that? Why is she lying this way? What was she doing when that happened to her? What was he doing to her? Why would he do? I mean, that's what I guess what I'm trying to get at is the way you approached a crime scene, and what made you so successful was that you were really able to figure out what was in their heads that was that created that terrible scene in front of you.
Yeah, and in part that it is, that childhood skill set, and in part I believe it is just being empathetic, and almost to a fault, because that's where when I'm looking at 17-year-old Carla Walker and the photos of her laying in that cow culvert, and then seeing what was done to her, the injuries, the way her dress was torn, and really feeling this is what this young girl experienced in the last moments of her life. And then the disturbing part is getting into the mind of her killer. And this is what he is after, the frenzy, the sexual frenzy, and what he's going after. It is, I think, the way that the anxiety has shaped me and the empathetic aspect that I have really plays into how I'm able to do this. I recognized I have to do this in order to do the job well, in order to be able to find the evidence or, the behaviors of the offender will give me motivations that might, limit a suspect pool. But at the same time, it's that taking that step is where now the emotional impact of the case hits me. And that's that emotional impact that I just kept bearing, through the course of my career.
The case you keep referring to is the case of Carla Walker, who was murdered in 1974 in Fort Worth, Texas. She was a young teenager. And you open the book with, that having just spoken to her brother, and you close the book, coming back full circle to the Carla Walker case. And you write, the collateral damage of Carla's murder was vast and unrelenting, from her parents to her siblings to her boyfriend and the entire Fort Worth community. So many had suffered. So many were trapped in that sad past. The person who had taken so much just walked away. I was flooded by feelings leaving Fort Worth, grief over the tragic loss of a young girl's life, horror over what she had experienced during her last moments, desperation to solve her case so that I wouldn't let her family down. Sitting behind the steering wheel of my car, I sobbed. I had always been able to tuck my feelings away after each case. When they did escape, it was usually in the form of a middle-of-the-night panic attack. The last one had been so severe, I fainted on the bedroom floor. Now my emotions spilled over. I buried my face in my hands. I wondered if I would ever stop crying. That's really quite powerful.
Yeah, and that was really a tough time for me, and this is where, again, relating to Carla's family, in particular her brother Jim, who was younger. He was 5 years younger, 12 at the time that she was killed. And then when Jim, when he was old enough to drive himself, a few years later, he's relating to me how he would drive himself in the middle of the night to that cow culvert where his sister had been left and literally stay in that culvert all night, hoping the killer would show up.
Really?
Yes.
I don't think people ever really take that in. I mean, we hear these stories of murders happening and then everybody moves on. And I don't think, 5 years later, that boy, that little brother is driving to the place where his sister was murdered to sit.
Well, even before, this is a case that was solved. But before, Jim was calling me, and he has been since that time doing his own investigations. And I've experienced that over and over again. People think, okay, it's a cold case. It's been so long, the loved ones, family members of the victims, it's now they're calloused to that loss and they're living their lives normally. No, they don't. It never leaves them and it impacts them, until it forever. I never use the term closure when the case is solved because these family members, that's not what they get. When I help identify who took the life of their loved one, or like with Golden State Killers living victims, who attacked them, they get an answer, but it doesn't reset their life. It doesn't bring their loved one back, and they still suffer trauma. When I was at watching the victim impact statements from the Golden State Killer's victims, some of his victims, and the Golden State Killer was identified as Joseph D'Angelo, I saw the trauma pour out as they're talking to this man. In fact, one of the victims, after she gave her impact statement, when she walked out into the lobby of the court, she collapsed. It was so hard for her to have to get the courage, the emotion, and re-experience that so she could confront D'Angelo. It was just, it was such a bittersweet moment. Yes, we caught D'Angelo. He is in prison for the rest of his life. but all of these victims are still dealing with this trauma. You know, it's not a time to celebrate. We can be proud that we helped. But when these cases are solved, just like in Carla Walker's case, you know, the genealogy identified McClurry.
Talk about the end of that case and how that killer was caught.
Yeah, we did an episode. It was a show that I was the host of called DNA of Murder, and we did this episode on the Carla Walker case, and it aired, but we had ongoing testing still going on.
DNA testing.
DNA testing, and you know that takes a long time, and it doesn't match up with the production cycle. And so the episode aired, and it was still an unsolved case. Carla's boyfriend Rodney was still under suspicion. I still had my concerns about Rodney as possibly being Carla's killer. But we knew we had a DNA sample, and there were some complexities with the genealogy testing of that sample, but ultimately we were able to get a genealogy type, and the lab that did that work was able to identify this McClurry, and when they identified him, he was still a resident of Fort Worth, Texas, and his name was actually in the Carla Walker case file. And so he's an older gentleman. He was in his late 70s, had some health issues when Fort Worth PD, confronted him and got a direct sample from him, and it matched the semen off of Carla's bra strap and dress. And he put himself in the parking lot. He basically said, yeah, I abducted Carla. And, you know, his excuse was it looked like she was having a fight with her boyfriend and I decided to save her. You know, it's how they excuse their actions. But he obviously did more. He sexually assaulted her and killed her. And that's where, you know, Carla's family, Jim has an answer, but it doesn't bring Carla back.
And they know that the person responsible is not on the street. I mean, that has to be there must be some modicum of comfort in that.
There is for select individuals, that most certainly is a form of comfort. This is like with, there were several of Golden State Killer's victims, living victims, who always thought he's going to come back and get me. I mean, some of them, like one, moved down to Mexico for a period of time just to avoid, because she thought that he was out there and we were on to him. You know, so that is a form of comfort. But you know, the interesting thing is that after D'Angelo was caught as a Golden State Killer, my wife admitted to me she felt more comfortable because she was scared that, you know, she knew I was investigating that case. And there's another investigator on the case whose wife was also, you know, scared about what's going to happen, you know, to us as a family if we get too close to identifying him. But, you know, getting into these cases and you know, the just the tragedy is that if you sit in a courtroom, you know, on one side you have the people for, you know, the victims' families and friends, and the other side is typically the family and friends of the defendant, of the killer. But you see, when somebody's convicted, you know, there's no victor in this. The killer's family is devastated. D'Angelo's daughters, you know, lost their father, you know, find out their father is this horrible serial predator. You know, again, it's just, it's such a, it's a tragedy. These types of cases are a tragedy that persists forever for these families on both sides.
So when you went to go see the therapist finally after going to Fort Worth and visiting with Carla Walker's brother, what did she teach you about how to deal with the trauma you encounter every day in your job?
Well, fundamentally, you know, she likened my trauma. You know, I'm not, you know, like officers that have been involved in shootings with that acute trauma, or soldiers and what they may experience. You know, it's very much a chronic form of trauma. And she said every time you're working one of these cases, it's like a nick, you know, and, you know, after 30 years of doing this, you have so many nicks, you know, you're bleeding out. And part of her counseling of me was I have to open up, and get it out sooner than just put it inside, which I still am not very good at.
Open up meaning tell people you're experiencing this?
Tell people I'm experiencing, going in for therapy, and, at least saying, hey, I just worked a horrific case. It's really bothering me. This is what's really bothering me about the case, and just get it out versus, going home and pouring another, glass of bourbon. But part of this therapy was interrupted because it just happened I was doing it right when the pandemic started, and she got crushed with everybody so anxious about the pandemic that I said, okay, I'm good enough. I've got to, I've got a handle on this. I don't need to keep going to therapy, and so that's kind of where it stayed. And, and I think part of, writing the book, I'm recognizing, maybe I should go back. Yes.
Were you surprised at how many other homicide investigators contacted you to say they could relate to, because, you might have stopped therapy, but I'll tell you what, writing the book had to be therapeutic because you're very honest about all your anxiety and you're very honest about your panic attacks and the toll it took on you.
Well, it very much so. And I think because I was working with a collaborator, Robin, she in many ways turned into my therapist.
Right.
Now I'm talking to her and I'm breaking down, as I'm talking to her about the various cases or experiences. And that's where this book evolved. And initially it was, going to be the deep dive on the Golden State Killer investigation. Then it was going to be all these fascinating cases I worked in my career. But now I think the primary message of this book is really the toll working these types of cases takes. And the message is, if you are in this line of work, it is okay to seek help and get it earlier than later, or you'll end up like me, or you'll be just burying yourself in the bottom of a bottle, or worse with some of what some people do to themselves. And so that's really, I think, the message. And I did the book tour. As you know, you interviewed me to launch the book tour off, and I so appreciate that. Still.
What an honor. It was so much fun.
That was awesome. But I had many mental health professionals come up to get their book signed and thank me for being open about this, saying this is something that they see day in and day out that people just aren't talking about.
No, they're not. They're not. And I'm so struck by the fact that you had other homicide investigators reach out to you and say, boom, I relate. That I felt the same way. And all those years you had known each other, neither one of you had said, oh man, I'm feeling really anxious, or I had a panic attack last night, or I had to go to the ER because I thought I was having a heart attack, but it was just a panic attack.
Well, and I also think, in part is as I've matured as a man, I've gotten older, I'm much more willing to talk about my emotions. Being in my mid-30s in law enforcement, no way. And that's where the people who are reaching out to me are in a similar phase of their life. They have all this trauma, and they are now no longer in this alpha male. They have to, pump up their chest. They're saying, yes, I'm hurting too. And I think that's great, and that's a segment of this population of professionals that I think will be easier to get to talk. It's going to be the guys that are still on the force in their mid-30s or early, mid-20s.
How do you reach them? How do you reach them and tell them, hey, you might be feeling like this? Because you even you admit in the book that you didn't even recognize the trauma that you were feeling and experiencing from these cases.
I personally think because now we're seeing more women doing this line of work, that you will see, because they will be more open about, and they have to bridge the gap between the male culture, and that's always, the struggle. But in my experience, as I've seen women become more ingrained in the investigations of these cases is that the men that are working side by side with them, they do develop an openness with those women, because they know that that woman is experiencing what they're experiencing. And that woman is going to say, hey, I know this is bothering you. And that man will probably talk to her before he goes home and talks to his wife. That's just kind of the way that works. I'm fortunate in some ways is that my second wife, Sherry, is in the line of work.
Right. She's in the business.
She's in the business.
Tell us about Sherry. What does she do?
She is currently she's a part-time DNA analyst for Colorado Springs PD, but I met her on the job. And I was the one that was saying, she was an intern. I was saying, hey, you need to start getting out to crime scenes. And then pretty soon she got hired doing in the same position that I was. And so she's doing crime scenes as well as doing the DNA work. So she's seen horrific things. She understands that. She didn't get into the investigation side like I did, but she's somebody who can relate to, what I've gone through.
Right.
And so there is at least an outlet that I have that many people don't have, but that's where, if you do have, that's where I do think that these younger individuals on the force, there may be greater chances today just to open up with somebody else that they feel comfortable talking to, just because now they have, it's not just that male-dominated alpha dog type of culture. There is going to be a different perspective.
So interesting. Finally, I just wanted to get your reaction to, there was a Wall Street Journal article a couple of weeks ago talking about the fact that anxiety, far from being this burden to people, could actually be a sort of superpower. The writer of the article, quoted some, psychiatrists and social scientists who were saying that actually being anxious all the time means you're good in a crisis, because basically you spend your entire life living right on the edge of thinking, I'm right on the edge of disaster and I've got to be prepared and ready. And so ironically, when the shit does hit the fan, so to speak, that people who are anxious do better. And I thought that was a really interesting way to look at it. I pray to God it's true, as someone who's been anxious my entire life. But I'm curious what you think of it, especially because I think your work requires a certain amount of, oh my God, I'm dealing with the absolute most horrific situation a human being can deal with right now, which is the scene of one human being's absolute depravity toward another in this murder. Do you buy that supposition, that premise?
Well, I can speak for situations where when the shit does hit the fan, I'm able to maintain a level of calmness. When I am rolling out to a very high, let's say a very complex crime scene, a lot of activities going on, I've seen coworkers that just crater in terms of how am I going to deal with this, and I very much am very calm in that moment. And then when I've had situations, let's say a medical emergency at home or elsewhere, and everybody's really in a panic, I'm very calm in those situations. Now, I never correlated it with the anxiety aspect. And so that's an interesting thought for me, because it's sort of like, I just go into that instant. Okay, it's almost like that biofeedback where I go, okay, a lot of stuff is going on. This is a serious deal, but now I need to focus in order to either do the job or handle this crisis. And I just have a tendency to be able to do that more so than other people. I've seen, other people who can do that, but, a lot of people seem to really start to get into that panic set, and then they're not thinking right.
No, I was just going to pick the exact same word, that ability when everything is going crazy to truly be able to focus like a laser beam on what needs to be done and to do it.
It's not necessarily a tunnel vision, but it very much is a very focused energy Yeah, like laser beam. Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, boom, this is what I have to do. I can't be sitting here and worrying about anything. I got to do it. There's no choice here. And I just got to move forward.
I like the idea that maybe you and I and others like us who have anxiety maybe have a secret superpower.
Yeah.
Paul Holes, it's been so wonderful to talk to you. Congratulations again on the success of Unmasked. It's an amazing book. I'm not remotely surprised that you aren't just getting a bunch of true crime fans lined up waiting to ask you for an autograph, but mental health experts too, because you are so honest about your own struggles with anxiety and panic. And I think you're going to help a lot of people.
Well, I hope so. And I so appreciate, you having me on and being so open and easy to talk to about this subject.
All right. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening today to Heart of the Matter. You can find this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on our website at drugfree.org/podcast. And as a reminder, if you need help with a loved one who is struggling with substance use, you can text 55753 or visit drugfree.org. We'll talk to you soon.